everybody, welcome back to the channel. Now, as sometimes happens on BookTube, a lot of booktubers, especially in this particular corner of BookTube, we might end up reading similar things, sometimes even the same thing, and this is kind of what happened in this case. No sooner had I finished up this fun collection from the Men's Adventure Library Journal, I watched them Eat Me Alive, edited by Robert Deis and Wyatt Doyle, beautifully put together. No sooner had I finished this, I've had it for a while. I think I read the first story several years back when I first got it, and just got around to reading it, thinking this would be a fun little thing to profile on my channel. And no sooner had I thought that and read it and finished it, that I saw that Great Minds Think Alike and Tim at Secret Fire Books had done the same thing. And he read this and talked about it in his August reading wrap-up, or his August reading report video, which I'll link to below. Very fun and enthusiastic little capsule review of this this beautiful little gory surprise. Now, Tim gave a brief glimpse of some of the great cover art inside this Men's Adventure Library volume from Robert Deis, Bob Deis, and Wyatt Doyle, who edit the Men's Adventure Library. This is actually a Men's Adventure Journal book. I think this might be what they use to describe the thinner little volumes that they put out. What I'm going to do is just talk a little bit as I go through this slim volume. It's a lot of fun. You know, Men's Adventure magazines covered all kinds of stories. They had westerns, war stories, crime stories, kind of sexy, sleazy stories, and all sorts of animal attack stories, as you will see from the various cover paintings and interior art that is shown in this volume. And this is a cool little book with, it's got this new texture, they call it, so the feel is kind of interesting, and it's very high quality production, but like all of the work that these guys do at the Men's Adventure Library, and of course the Men's Adventure Quarterly magazine. Now, you've probably by now seen lots of videos talking about Men's Adventure magazines. What were they? You know, they were very popular in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, kind of an outgrowth of the pulp magazine. And these Men's Adventure magazines were very popular with returning soldiers, from, you know, veterans from World War II, and you know, men looking for some, you know, I'm sure there were some female readers perhaps, but mostly men looking for, after a hard day's work with the beer and something kind of fun and blood and thunder and full of you know, stuff happening that could take their mind off of their daily drudgery. And boy, these, if there's one thing, the stories in this little curated collection exhibit is grab you by the throat in the opening paragraph, pell-mell, crazy action and adventure, and quite often some grim results, consequences to these animal attack stories. They're not just fun, they're actually, some of them, quite gory and bloody. All of them involve quite a bit of physical disfigurements or loss of limb in a lot of these. So anyway, as an adjunct, as a companion piece to Tim's little capsule review that he did, I'm going to do a little flip through of this in some more detail. So let's take a look. Now, just real quick, I'll just show the other two volumes that I have here. And I guess the basic difference between these two, what Bob Deis and Wyatt Doyle have labeled the Men's Adventure Library Journal. I watched them Eat Me Alive, which I'm going to go into in more detail in a moment. And then Man Eaters, Killer Sharks, and Men's Adventure magazines. And both of these are given the Men's Adventure Library Journal nomenclature, so I'm guessing it's because they're thinner than the others, the thicker books, like this one, Cryptozoology Anthology, again edited by Robert Deis and Wyatt Doyle with David Coleman in this case. This one is, of course, the Men's Adventure. I don't know if you can see this down here, but the Men's Adventure Library only, doesn't say journal because it's a much thicker and more text-based tome. This is a very fun collection of, fiction tales, pseudo-fiction or docudrama type reportage, I guess, and just some straight up, cryptozoology reports and discussions. Apparently men's adventure mags, especially in the 70s, were really a big source for cryptozoology reports and discussions of Bigfoot, Loch Ness, monster, etc. So opening up inside, we have the table of contents. Now there are 5 stories, 5 pieces of fiction, maybe some of them purporting to be or appearing to have a realistic approach. And they are written in a realistic fashion, but they're obviously, made up and fictionalized and heavily imaginative reports in some cases. But they are, the one thing they have in common, almost all of them are extremely well written. We have kind of a joint kind of editorial, I guess you would say, setting the scene by both the editors. So Bob Deis is the guy who has over, I believe, 10,000 or more of these men's adventure magazines in his own personal library. And he and his partners, in this case Wyatt Doyle, they go through and curate the best of the best, the cream of the crop, from these different magazines. And Wyatt Doyle is more in charge of the layout, the design of the books, and as you see, that it's beautifully laid out, just like the Men's Adventure Quarterly magazines are, and all the books are, frankly, that this group of individuals, these talented and very friendly guys, put out. So, funny as hell, 2 takes on killer creatures in Men's Adventure mags. It sounds like it says 2 takes. They're not really in any disagreement, particularly. Just slight difference in perspective of what they're deciding to highlight. So Bob Deis talks about specifically, animal attack stories in men's adventure magazines. Just like in magazines or newspapers, it tells the reader to go forward to some different pages, and they keep them color-coded to keep it straight, right? So here we have the rest of Bob's talking about, giving some notes on each of the 5 stories in this volume, and the general mindset of kind of consistent or recurring features of these stories. Here we have man's conquest and man's adventure. And then we have trapped in Mexico's cave of giant rats. This one here's a moose. Great picture of a moose attacking. Here, The Moose Went Mad, from Men's Magazine, March 1956. So a lot of these stories are from the 50s and early 60s. The Men's Adventure Magazine, the animal attack stories continued into the 70s Men's Adventure magazines as well, kind of the end of the heyday of them. But a lot of the ones here, especially a lot of the cool covers that are reproduced in this book, are from that era, the 50s and the 60s. And then now we have Wyatt Doyle's editorial continuing, and he's focusing more on kind of how, men's adventure magazines, they were fighting for eyes on the newsstand, and so they would go with whatever salacious or colorful, eye-popping covers and cover stories that they could to get people to pick up the magazines. And then he goes into also some more detail about animal attack stories. They're, as they say, two takes, but they're not particularly, they're not in opposition of each other, just complementing each other. Both very interesting reads. Here's a great cover right here. I battled a giant otter. Otter attack. This is a cover by Robert Dors. You'll see some more cover art by him later. Hunting adventures. We couldn't tear them off. Looks like snapping turtles, and which, anyone who's been around the swamps and the bayous would probably attest to how dangerous they could be. We couldn't tear them off, right? Doesn't look particularly frightening in this little photo here, but the cover is great. Here's some attacking iguanas. Looks like some kind of an ibex or an antelope of some kind attacking. And then a horse even. Champ. November 57. This is Peril. May 1958. I Brawled with the Dragons for Men Only. April 1955. Cool. All right, and then we get into the clack of killer crustaceans, and this is leading into the first hair-raising and very well-written story in this volume, and that is I Watched Them Eat Me Alive. Attack of big coconut crabs, I believe they're called. So here we have from a picture by Clarence Dorr, from All Man, November 1959. Right, we got, they don't really credit this story, but it's on the cover. Some regular crabs attacking there. Up to my neck and live lobsters, half eaten and half dead. Man's life. Now, we're going to talk more about Will Hulsey later. There's a portfolio of Will Hulsey's cover art coming up. He was famous for his animal attack stories. We'll get into those more in a moment. And here we have art by George Gross. I Watched Them Eat Me Alive. From the pages of Man's Conquest, November 1956. Now, the cannibal crabs crawl to kill. This is quite a hair-raising story and very well written. This is and quite often what Wyatt Doyle will do when he designs these is he'll put reproduce artwork from the actual magazine and repurpose it and put it just to give you a taste of what it would have looked like originally, and then go into the actual story in the text here with its very easy to read text. And this story is about a sailor. Apparently he's like a farmer in Java or something, American, and who got into the war effort, and he's on a Dutch battle cruiser, and it was sunk, and he somehow survives and lands on this deserted island. He seems idyllic enough at first, and he's planning with all the boat activity because of the war going back and forth, again set in World War II. He expects possibly to be rescued pretty soon, and he's eating coconuts, etc. And then to his horror, when he's climbing a tree to get a view of a ship out to sea, out of the tops of these trees come a bunch of these coconut crabs the size of bowling balls, I guess. They just come after him and just, pinching off fingers and lacerating all over his chest, and he's trying to escape from them, etc. And it's a pretty grim story, as it turns out. Crawling Death of Bad Luck Island. Art by Bob Schultz. Anyway, well-written story, though. Sets the scene of the island before it gets to the horrors. And then here we come to Will Hulsey, portfolio Will Hulsey, the Beast Master. And as they say here, if he had only done this one picture, Weasels Rip My Flesh, which is the cover of another men's adventure book, I believe one of the first ones they put out, perhaps the first one they put out, which they have since re-released in an expanded version with more color art reproduced inside. Michael K. Vaughan talked about that one recently back in Garbagist. Anyway, Will Hulsey did that. He also, as you can see, a lot of the same kind of looking models here, but here's looks like a vulture, a condor, I'm not sure what attack. Curved Beaks Tore My Flesh. Apparently Tore My Flesh was a very popular story title. Weasels Rip My Flesh. Here's a rampaging elephant. And again, they point out that Hulsey was famous for having very voluptuous women in states of near undress, wearing red dresses or red blouses that were torn, and you'll see them all through this portfolio. Here's her in the grip of an elephant's trunk, monkeys attacking, snakes, and a lion, right? These are all from, looks like, the 50s. And then we have here, Chewed Alive and Screaming, Attack of Rats. She's also wearing a red, looks like a red garment here. Killer Puma of Victoria. Battling a wild boar, killer with short tusks. And the big blonde and the black beast Ripper. Black Puma. Notice all red and all torn or tattered, leaving a little to the imagination to garner the eyeballs of horny, red-blooded, heterosexual males across America coming home from their 9 to 5. Here's another one. Giant spiders trapped in the web of creeping death. Man's Life, March 1959. And the story that comes up next, Flying Rodents Ripped My Flesh. Again, here's the Rip My Flesh Again story by Lloyd Parker, art by Will Hulsey. So this story, again, look at this first paragraph, right? Bellowing, his hands clawing at the nape of his neck, Greco surged out of the deep clump of teepee behind the clearing, stumbling toward me. For a second, I thought he'd lost his mind. I stood rooted, motionless, watching him. "Run, George, in heaven's name, run!" Greco shrieked. Sprawling on his belly, inconceivable terror marred the handsome, burnished face, yet in some grotesque way, it actually seemed funny. I had a glimpse of a squirrel perched on his neck. It seemed funny as hell for a second. But it is not funny at all. But, of course, the author has to acknowledge that these honey gliders, these flying squirrels of Australia, here, they're somewhere, I believe it says Van Arnhem Land, maybe in some kind of island off the north coast of Queensland, perhaps. But as most of these stories patterns, they start right in the action. They throw you into the attack phase, and then they go back to the beginning of the story to kind of set up the scene of where they are, how they got there, what's going on. And here, this follows their being very hungry in the land of the tribal headhunters, etc., or cannibals that they're talking about, and then friendly enough with the natives, but having a hard time finding edible food. And when John Greco, one of the party, goes looking for some birds' eggs that he found, that's when the flying squirrels attack. Now, this is something that is not likely to happen at all in reality, but it makes for a pretty interesting, hair-raising story. The Island of Man-Eating Rats, also Will Hulsey. This is really cool. You see this whole trail of rats making its way to the attack, and he's got a bloodied rock that he's using to bash the creatures. Now, most of these stories don't have much of a fellow feeling for the animals that are attacking. They're strictly savage, ravenous creatures. But one of the stories in this book, we'll get to it later, is quite sympathetic to the animal. So that makes for an interesting change. Anyway, this ends pretty grimly for at least one of the individuals. Then we get some guerrilla, this is leading up to the next story, some guerrilla attack, guerrillas at large. Guerrilla attack cover stories from Safari, True Men, etc. It's a pretty impressive painting right there. It's by M.L. Bauer. Safari, February 1956. Man's Adventure, 1961. And Animal Life, art by Clarence Dorr. Hunting Adventures and Rage. This is where the story that comes next comes from, the magazine Rage. Terror Safari from January 1961 issue of Rage. Got some cheesecake there. And, right, Terror Safari. Bloody encounter with a lust-crazed gorilla. And then quite a different setup in the actual magazine that was reproduced here with the Pride of Lions here. Right? Story by Lester Hutton, art by John Duilo. Now, this is a really cool story. This might be tied with my favorite of the 5 in this little volume here. So this story is about 2 brothers who become safari guides in Africa. And the narrator and his brother, they're leading a safari of women, mostly married women who are on the platform most of the time. That's quite a funny little aspect. And one of the party is not part of that group, but she's also a young lady who's been assigned, a photojournalist who's been assigned to come and take some photos. And there's a mutual attraction between her and the narrator, but nothing's really happening at that stage. And then they come across a rampaging gorilla that has killed 2 women already and has ran off with a 13-year-old native girl. And so the narrator and his chief tracker and some other assistants, Africans, take off in some jeeps to try to rescue the girl. And the Martha, the photojournalist, tags along kind of against the narrator's wishes. And then they encounter this rampage. You know, again, there's to kind of cover, the writer covers his ass, I guess, by saying that this is not usual behavior and that, you know, gorillas never are interested sexually in human women, etc. But then says this seems to be the case, that this one's preying on and wanting to kill these young maidens that it's abducting, and it ends up, of course, making a run for it when they tree it, and then it comes out of the bushes, grabs Martha from the Jeep, practically tears the left arm off of our hero, the narrator, but he pursues to try to rescue her in the man-on-beast action that follows. It's quite a lively tale, and really well written, really well described. This is probably one of the most positive outcomes of any of the stories in here, but quite an interesting and blood-curdling tale nonetheless, and very well written. Mating raid of the Congo killer. Salacious aspects to draw in the interested reader. Rage for Men, The Lady and the Gorilla, another cool cover by Clarence Dorr from 1957. Not only was there rage, but there's Rage for Men. Little advertisement for another one of the Men's Adventure Library journal books. Cuba, Sugar, Sex, and Slaughter. A bunch of stories about Castro's Cuba. Now we come to one of the Men's Adventure magazine's more notorious kind of side venues, which was the Nazi killing and Nazi torturing, and not just Nazis, also commies, as they called it, Chinese, Korean, North Koreans, or Vietnamese communists, how they would get a hold of the, enemies and torture them using animals or beasts or insects of some kind. Sex rites of the Inca priests. Here's a pretty grisly one. Obviously, killer ants being used by some kind of Japanese soldiers, perhaps, to torment their captives. 1,000 Brides for Hitler's Beast of Horror. Gotta love some of these lurid titles, and ladies in bikinis everywhere. The Terrible Oriental Mink Torturers. And over here, Writhe My Lovely in the Tent of Torture. Nazis and Arab torturing, and this woman with spiders, apparently. And it remarks up here in this caption that this is one of paintings based off of model Eva Lind. I believe they did Men's Adventure Library did a book about Eva Lind, who's still alive, still with us as far as I'm aware, and who was a photographer as well as a cheesecake model, and often model for the covers of these Men's Adventure mags. Man's Exploits. Here's some, apparently this was supposed to be, the title says, We Saved the Blonde Beauties from the Piranha Horror. But obviously, as it says here, the cover above has plenty to lure a MAM reader. MAM, short for Men's Adventure Magazines. Near-naked damsels, a deadly snake, a snapping whip, and a trio of cruel tormentors in a bizarre torture scenario. But despite the story's title, what it does not have are piranha. There are piranha over here, though. Soft Maidens for the Monster Devil Fish. Sorry, the Monsters Devil Fish. Cool comic booky cover there. Now, The Art of Clarence Dorr, another portfolio. Now, what apparently Clarence Dorr, eyes wide open, they say, right, is famous for is buxom blonde women. But not just women. You'll see men here, for example, with women, though, particularly known for their parted big red lips and big bulging eyes. And you'll see they say it's really obvious once you start seeing it over and over again when you look through these mags and these different cover illustrations, and you'll see it over and over again. You can recognize Dorr's art by those big widened in shock eyes. So here we have Champion for Men, right? So some Pit of Snakes there. And here's Rage. Barracudas feasted on my flesh. Now notice again, see? Bulging eyes, parted red lips, right? Bamboods attacking. And over here again, see bats. Bats attacking. This is from All Men, July 1959. Again, similar hairstyle. Some cleavage showing. and some kind of skimpy clothing for the time, and eyes widened in terror. Champion, man's exploits, gusto, real men, animal life. Again, talking about Doyle, who retired in 1966, but had painted cover illustrations and interior art for all of these men's magazines. And just how many of these were on the stands is unbelievable. All Man, Animal Life, Battle Cry, Brave, Champion for Men, Courage, Escape to Adventure, For Men Only, Fury, Gusto, Male, Man's Adventure, Man's Daring, Man's Exploits, Man's Life, Man's Magazine, Man to Man, Men in Conflict, Rage for Men, Real Men, Rugged Men, Safari, Sir, with the exclamation point, Spur, True Adventures, True Men Stories, and True Weird. Don't think we'd get away with any of these titles of magazines these days, particularly. Whoops, I've got to watch this one. And now, a little note about the writer Robert F. Doyle, who wrote the story that's coming up next. They had the kind of cover spread for a book that the Men's Adventure Library put out, A Handful of Hell, some war stories by Robert F. Doyle. And let me try to strategically cover a little later magazine, 1973, when in the 70s they were getting a little more girly mag looking. But it does have that actual cover story, The Strange Revenge of Wyoming's Most Hunted Giant Puma, right? And it's from Mail magazine. And here's the reproduction of the interior artwork. Pretty cool. A Wounded Animal's Fury versus a Psycho Tracker's Raw Hate. From magazine True. Strange Revenge of Wyoming's Most Hunted Giant Puma. Art by Mort Kunstler, right, under the pen name Emmett K. And Mort Kunstler, very famous artist. You'll see his name and his artwork, in a lot of these Men's Adventure Quarterly and Men's Adventure Library publications by Bob Dice, Wyatt Doyle, and Bill Cunningham. He's quite an artist. Now, sounds kind of salacious. There's no real mention in the actual story of it being a giant puma or mountain lion, but this is the story that I mentioned earlier was sympathetic to the animal in question. So this is about a bush pilot who's bringing a attractive young woman, and her older, and the psycho of the title, kind of egotistical, animal hating, kind of rough-hewn businessman who takes a shot at this cougar, wounds it, and it sends off in a frenzy of attacks a 19-year-old boy and seriously hurts him. And then the bush pilot is trying to go out and catch this mountain lion, put it out of its misery before it harms anyone else. Anyway, definitely taken from the perspective of bad hunter, bad guy, shouldn't have shot it, that was stupid, causing more problems than it's worth. It's a beneficent animal that now has to be put down because of you. But will the animal get its revenge? The killer cat wouldn't give up our bodies. All right, now, snakes on the page. I love this little tagline here. If anyone remembers the snakes on a plane from several years back. So several snake attack covers, hunting adventures. Some rattlesnake bit this guy in the face. That's pretty gnarly. Hunting adventures, summer 1956. And then we have another guy with a hatchet going against a snake. And guess what? You recognize the eyes? Cleavage, big eyes, open mouth. Could it be? Yes, it's Clarence Doyle. And this one, male cobra attack. And again, this guy here is hanging in some kind of pit of cobras, maybe. Pretty crazy. And then we get an excerpt from a story that's not in here. This is a little confusing, I guess, because it's more similar to how they lead up to a new story. But it's just something they wanted to share. The Treasure of Prithviraj from Outdoor Adventure, June 1957. Art by Bob Wagner. And now, Attack of the Flying Snakes we have here. Man's Conquest, 1957. Cavalcade, A-OK for Men. That's a pretty cool one. The snake, just guns, point, can't get my gun. Look at this, 3 of the same thing. Can't get my gun because the snake's going to get me. Looks like they repurposed that art quite a few times. And then, again, talking about the one and only Walter Kalin, who was prolific men's adventure writer, very fine writer. And they talk about in here, again, they put a book out featuring all stories by him, He-Men, Bagmen, and Nymphos. And, of course, here we have a more 70s, January 1971. You could tell already more sleazy, more photo covers rather than painted covers. But this one, trapped in the bayou's pit of a million snakes. This is a crazy story here. Again, what this one entails is a kind of warden, or I guess he's the head of a security guard of a prison, and they have to move some troublemaker prisoner out, a former guy who murdered his wife and her lover with an axe. But he's a tough-as-nails dude who's from the bayou. As it turns out, happens to be pretty handy in this situation. Anyway, the plane, then there's also the pilot. There's just 3 of them. The plane somehow has a gas leak, and they're forced to make a emergency kind of crash landing into the swamp. Anyway, they happen to land in a huge nest of water moccasins, and they just start piling through the planes into the cabin, and the men are having to ward them off, and it's looking pretty hopeless. Somebody's going to have to cross through the snakes and get to the nearest little kind of fuel station and come back with a can of gas to get them enough gas to taxi out of there. And the narrator tries, but he's not doing too well. Unfortunately, he can't make it very far. So then this prisoner decides to take off and do it instead. It's a hair-raising and interesting story. The first one came down through a crack in the ceiling right above the instrument panel. It came down reaching around with its head and with the brown bands flowing in behind it, slick and slimy. The mouth was open and you saw the white inside it that gave the deadly reptile its name, Cottonmouth. Clutching you right away around the throat and getting you to read the rest. And again, in true fashion, set the scene open the story with some blood-curdling action, and then step back and give the context and provide more of the setup before we get back to the action. 4 Men Only from January 1956. Again, art by Clarence Dorr, the guy who likes to paint the curly hair and the wide open eyes. Anyway, this is a very good story. Again, the Walter Kalin lives up to the reputation that the Bob Deis and Wyatt Doyle outlined for him in the introduction there. This is art by Mal Singer, True War, January 1958. Anaconda or Python Attack. And then here's a picture of Walter Kalin, who'd passed away in 2017, which I believe is when this volume was first published. So again, this is now about 8 years old. Still available, print on demand. It's beautifully manufactured. These guys use, the Men's Adventure Library guys use a kind of print on demand company that does really high quality work, both for their Men's Adventure Quarterly magazines and for these books. Here in an interesting little moose head in a lodge with new texture, kind of to promote the texture style of this cover. And then some more of the books in the back. Cryptozoology, which I showed you earlier. A Handful of Hell, He-Man, Bagman, and Nymphos, which they in Cuba, which they talked about and showed inside. Weasels Rip My Flesh with that great cover, Will Hulsey cover. And Barbarians on Bikes. Now, there are many, many more since then that they Men's Adventure Library have put out. Highly recommend their product. Really well made. If you like this kind of thing, it's a nice time capsule of the 50s to the 70s and the kind of magazines that you would never see these days unless you happen to come across one of the originals. So I hope you enjoyed that little flip through of this Men's Adventure Library Journal thin volume. I watched them eat me alive. Very fun if you like this kind of thing. It's a little gnarly, some of these stories, but they're well written and surprisingly well written, you would think, for what would appear to be a ephemeral kind of, kind of man's, rag, really. Nothing that would be particularly edifying or high-brow literature, and it certainly is not, but there's quite a bit of TLC put not only in the story construction and writing, but also in, of course, as you can see, the beautiful cover art and interior illustrations. So that wraps up this flip through video. I hope you enjoyed that, or at least some of the art anyway. And I appreciate you watching. We'll talk to you in the next video. Take care.